Welcome to the One Life Maps podcast. Here's your host and co-author of Listen to My Life, Maps for Recognizing and Responding to God in My Story, Sharon Swing.
Greetings, everyone. This is Sharon Swing. I'm so glad you decided to join us again on the One Life Maps podcast. We have our special reoccurring guest with us today, Adele Calhoun, who is the author of Invitations from God, Accepting God's Offer to Rest, Weep, Forgive, Wait, Remember, and More. Greetings, Adele.
Hi, Sharon. Good to be with you.
So glad you came back. And Joan Kelly, our Director of Facilitator Development for One Life Maps, is with us today too. Joan?
Hello, everybody.
So glad you're here too. Now, Joan Kelly is, like I said, the Director of Facilitator Development for One Life Maps, but she also, along with our friend Gail Donahue, lead a spiritual formation class at Willow Creek Community Church on Thursday mornings. And they went through this book, Invitations from God, a little while back and had a wonderful experience with it. And so we're going to join in this conversation together. And I just want to introduce Adele with her bio here. Now, she is married to Doug Calhoun, and they're co-pastors of spiritual formation at High Rock Covenant Church in Arlington, Massachusetts. They enjoy resourcing ministry leaders and pastors through spiritual direction, retreats, and teaching the Enneagram as certified Enneagram instructors. Adele is the author of the Spiritual Discipline Handbook as well, and the co-author of True You. So I am just excited that we get to have this conversation today. And Adele, can you tell us a little bit about what brought this book to life for you? What was going on in your life when you decided to dive into this?
Well, my husband and I were co-senior pastors of a church outside Boston, and we were talking about the sermon series we wanted to do. And I said, everybody has so many options in their life. I feel like they don't slow down and listen to God's invitations that could actually transform their relationships and bring life into their families. They just don't have time to even think about what an invitation from God might be. So we decided to do a sermon series on invitations from God. And then my editor called me and said, "What are you writing?" And I said, "Nothing." And she said, "No, tell me what you're writing." And I said, "Writing about invitations from God." And so that's how it came about.
Well, I'm glad that you had that conversation with your editor, and this sermon series ended up as a book. It's really a precious book, and there's certain things about invitations from God that are a little bit interesting in what does that even mean to have an invitation from God. Can you say a few words about that?
Sure. I think about Jesus saying, "Come unto me, all you who are weary, and I will give you rest." Invitation. I think about Jesus saying, "Come follow me." Invitation. Jesus' language is a very invitational, but to understand, for instance, what the invitation to follow is about, we sort of have to go back and listen to Jesus' meaning of the word follow, rather than our 21st century thought that it's only leaders that matter. And if you're a follower, you probably don't matter nearly as much. And so I just spent time reading my Bible and finding invitations that were given to us from God. The invitation to wait, that's an invitation that comes to everyone. It's an inevitability in everybody's life. Everybody will wait. Well, God waits too. And so what's the relationship between the God who waits and the people who wait? So it was something that intrigued me, and I started researching.
I think this is Joan, as we were using the book in class, Adele, it was so fun over the course of the year to hear people's vocabulary change, and that word invitation came up so much more. It became something fresh and something they wanted to walk towards instead of be scared of. And it became a way that they asked questions of one another. I found myself, I mean, a very common question for me is, well, what do you think God's invitation is there, in
Yeah.
that situation? That was just a beautiful and fun and enriching way to see how people learn to kind of pick it up, the word invitation, and just kind of look at it and make it a normal part of their vocabulary.
Yeah, I felt like in the midst of this book, because the way you just described it, it was part invitations that we find in Scripture that we can apply to our lives, but
Right.
in how life happens a lot of times is that we're facing something sometimes rather difficult, and God has an invitation in it for us that help us to change perspectives.
That's perfectly said, because the invitation to follow, well, it might come to you in a situation where you would rather lead, you know, or the invitation to rest may come to you at a time when you feel like you don't have 2 seconds to rub together, or the invitation to weep may ambush you at a time when you think, I don't have time for grief. So the invitations are always coming through our experience. They're not some theological abstract, oh, God's mailing everybody invitations. They're all coming specifically to us given our life experiences.
Yeah,
We
right in the
would
midst
quite
of the story.
often we would quite often tell the women in our class to, kind of let's start thinking about them differently. It's not that invitation, that beautiful gift that shows up on your doorstep, with the red ribbon on top, right? We have to look for invitations in interruptions in our day, in
Mm-hmm.
situations that don't go well. They're hidden there. And after a while, it kind of for me in a weird sort of way, it becomes fun. Like, okay, I start looking for God in other places,
Right.
unexpected places that aren't,
Absolutely.
the beautiful fall tree with the leaves falling perfectly on the ground. There's
No,
invitations
it's not that.
in the line at the grocery store, right? When you're frustrated and the clerk, you get up to
Right.
the
And you'd
beginning.
want to hurry and you've got to
Mhm,
wait. Uh-huh.
mhm,
That's right.
An invitation to show the fruits of the Spirit in the midst of the difficulty.
mhm.
We'd rather not see it as an
Mm-hmm.
invitation. We see it as an annoyance,
Right. We label it
Right.
something else.
very much so.
But when you can flip that, when you can see that in this annoyance, God is actually inviting me to be present in some way that um, will change the way I experience this, it does become, like Joan said, it becomes a very sweet thing, I think. This past summer we moved and we had lots of things go wrong with our house. I mean, the new house that we moved into, tons of bad things happened. And the invitation was always to say, welcome, Jesus, welcome, into this. I find you, I seek you, instead of just, in a sense, uh, going off on all the awful things that had happened. And in the process, I began to see how I felt entitled, to have a charmed move. Well, that was a good thing to see about myself. It didn't feel too good,
Mhm.
but God was inviting me to look at my entitlement, at what I thought I deserved. It was big for me.
That really dovetails, Joan, with a paragraph that you pointed out on page 16. Why don't you read that paragraph? Let's talk about it.
I will. It says God's invitations are meant to mend, shape, anchor, and grow us into the character of Jesus. They call us into our true selves in Christ. They free us from the lie that says, the more invitations, the better. Invitations from the Holy One serve God's dream for the world. They don't call me to become what I produce, what others think of me, or what I know. They invite me to be free. And freedom comes from being an intentional follower of Jesus, one who is a little Christ in this world.
Hmm.
I love that. I love especially that first sentence, Adele. God's invitations are meant to mend, shape, anchor, grow us into the character of Jesus.
Well, I feel like that's what the invitations that God has given me, even very recently, is all about. Will I be mended from entitlement? Will I be shaped by waiting and frustration? Or will I just throw little fits from time to time
I
and turn myself into a victim? Poor me. Why is my life this way? No, it's life. Find Jesus in it and become like Jesus in it.
on page 17, I had underlined one of the paragraphs here. It says, without the lived experience of risking, parentheses, which is another word for trusting, and parentheses, God's invitations, our Christianity can devolve into dogma that rattles around in our heads. Some people spend years of their lives in church believing all the right things, but lacking an inner sense of being invited into God's own heart. The Bible is full of examples of religious people whose faith began with right answers or actions, but who missed the invitations of the Holy One. Say a few more words about that, Adele.
Well, you see, Jesus, again, in the Gospels, getting plenty of invitations, and you see him offering invitations to the religious leaders, to listen to him, to follow him, you have heard it said, but I say to you, I'm inviting you to rethink some of the things that you've thought you were certain about. Will you rethink these things? And you see these people who have probably memorized the Torah and who knows what else of the Bible, who are completely unwilling to ponder anything except their own thoughts.
As I think about that, and I read this earlier, I'm aware of the fact that some religious communities don't really allow us to think outside of what we have been told and what we know, in a way that even if we are considering thinking about it a different way, it's almost like we're not sure we're allowed to. When you think of
It's
like the
true.
Pharisees, I mean, they had such strict rules about how things are and what had to be done, and and all that. Even questioning those rules was probably not something that was within the norms of the
No.
environment.
I mean, don't
And
you
that,
think as you listen here, I'm just thinking about the word invitation. I mean, it just speaks to God saying, I want to have a relationship with you,
mhm.
you know?
Which leads to, I want you to listen to me and I want to listen to you. There's this Jesus saying continually, why don't you have ears to hear? Why don't you have eyes to see? It's almost like, here's this great invitation. Why don't you have? And you can almost hear this sense of, let's talk. Let's talk this out. Let's not argue it out. Let's sit down and reason together. And they just were like, you're a heretic. I'm not listening to you. Goodbye.
Right. And sometimes we respond to God with anger. Okay, this isn't going well. God, why are you doing this to me? As
Yes.
opposed to the understanding of, in this life we will have trouble. and God will be with us in it, and he will use it to shape us. It doesn't mean that he caused the
Mhm.
pipe to break and flood our basement or
No,
whatever. It
no.
means that even in that, there's an invitation to
There
become
is.
something
And
different.
to become grateful, to become patient, to become wise, to become like Jesus.
Yeah, and that leads right into that first chapter, an invitation to participate in our own healing. What's the key idea of this chapter, Adele?
So the key idea is that you cannot change what you are not aware of. You cannot be healed of what you are unwilling to name. And so the chapter is about, do you want better relationships? Do you want healthier default responses? Do you want patience? Do you want to not yell at your kids? Well, God is waiting to grace you with will that comes, that supernatural will, but you will have to participate. It isn't magic. And I think about all the times I was taught, well, I'm going to pray for patience, but then I would not do one thing to try to be patient. It was like, God, it's on you. You want me to be patient? Then wave that magic wand so I've got some.
Or just, God, make my life a little bit easier so I don't have to be patient.
So I don't have to.
And usually we
So
find
that
out it's something
each
the opposite.
chapter comes, each chapter centers on some sort of gospel story. And this one is about the man at the pool of Bethesda, where Jesus says to him, do you want to get well? And you would think his immediate response would be, are you kidding? Thank you. I'm so glad you came. I do. And that's not his response. And so I just sort of try to unpack that.
Well, I think this first chapter sets up the rest of the book so well. The invitation to participate in your own healing is a key thought here. It's not that God does it all, and there's this aspect of how we use language in Christendom that could leave us to believe that somehow God does it all, we can't do anything for ourselves. Yet he's looking for
Right.
full and active participants in this development, in our spiritual development, in our own healing and all. And on page 25, you have this question here that I have circled and exclamation points around it. Where do you wish Jesus would use magic rather than involve you? How would participating in your own healing draw you deeper into Jesus and freedom? Oh my goodness. What a great pairing of questions. Yeah. Where do you wish Jesus would use magic rather than involve you in your own healing?
Mhm.
Oh,
Isn't that so true? We all, at some point in time, think that. I think, Adele, you are a masterful question asker. And so as people are hearing this and, considering, should I read this book, just for the sheer questions that are in here, it's worth the price alone.
Thank
So
you.
many good questions to ponder.
yeah. And I just feel like that there's such a good challenge right in there. But I tell you what, Adele, why don't you kind of give us a tour of the book, and we might just jump in. So pause in between here, but why don't you run us through the table of contents here so we can give our
Okay.
listeners a
A
taste
taste.
of what kind of invitations you're talking about here.
So the second invitation is the invitation to follow. And honestly, this invitation became significant to me, most significant to me one time when I was trying to follow in a caravan somebody from Chicago to Appalachia. And the person in front was not conscious of the people behind. And I just thought it would be so much easier to be in the front car than trying to follow this person. And that whole trip was an invitation for me to follow and to not get angry and vexed and mad at the way I was being led, but to say, I can't do anything about that right now. What I can do is follow. And then I went and I looked at all the times Jesus talks about following and the times Jesus talks about leading. And then I looked up how often the Bible talks about leadership and how often it talks about following. And there's about 6 references to leadership and like hundreds to following. And I thought, oh, I don't know about following very much. So I started thinking about and studying what following might mean, and who am I following? Am I following the world in its pursuit of money, sex, and power? Am I following sort of the traditions I grew up in? Am I really following Jesus? So it's a book about, it's a chapter about what it means to actually follow Jesus, and in following him, become like him. And the next chapter is on the invitation to practice the presence of people. And this was an invitation specifically specifically for me, because I can be walking down a hall and somebody will be coming towards me, and I won't even see them unless they say my name. And I can be in such another headspace. I can be in the room with you and not be present. I can be nodding my head and not be here. And so it was this sense of, God is always in the present. God is always present. And all through the Bible, God is the God of presence who comes to be with us from Genesis to Revelation, and the dwelling of God is with people. And I thought, I'm not always present, and I miss God if I'm not present, and I miss people. And so it's simply this, we all know Brother Lawrence and his practicing the presence of God. Well, this is just taking that paradigm and shifting it over to what happens when we learn to be totally present to the beings that are in God's image right in front of us.
So chapter 4 is an invitation to rest. And Joan, I remember you saying that this one was a significant piece in your class that you took people through.
Yes. Well, I think especially so it's 100 some women, and I mean, this could apply to anybody, but we just don't know how to rest anymore, right? And so it was uh, quite challenging, yet encouraging to sit and, in our case, spend a week with this idea of what does it really mean to rest? What was Christ talking about? What was he moving us towards? And I like to think, you mentioned earlier, Adele, the Matthew 11 passage,
Mm-hmm.
and come for me. If I pick apart that first part, it's come is the invitation, but the promise is rest. It always felt like with each invitation there was a promise right behind it. And rest is one that, Christ does over and over again. And so it was challenging, but it was good and it was necessary. And the culture that we live in that just has, we can't hardly talk.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's a badge of courage.
And
Yeah.
water, a badge of courage.
You mentioned the culture is money, sex, and power, and I say productivity, I would add to that list. And that's the enemy of rest, thinking that our value somehow rests in how much we produce. So
That's right. That's right.
that's definitely a different one. So an invitation to weep. Why don't you say a few words about that, Adele? That's chapter 5.
Mm-hmm. So again, I watched in my congregation, people who went through deep grief, somebody they loved died, or some dreadful accident or something overtook their lives, and just how we haven't been taught to grieve. We've been taught to, in many cases, buck up and move on. And our culture wants you to buck up and move on, or we just become victims. And so we lose the agency of what God can do in grief if we will step into it the way Jesus stepped into the grief of Mary and Martha. And I love that in that story of Jesus with Mary and Martha, Jesus waits to go to Mary and Martha. He could heal from a distance. He'd already done that. He could have said the word, Lazarus be healed. And he knew it was desperate, but he not only let Lazarus die, he let Mary and Martha face into a grief, and he waited to go. And I think there's something about what grief can do when we're invited into it that can change us. And when he came, he had very different conversations with them, perhaps, than if he'd just healed Lazarus. So there's something about grief that is meant to shape us. And in Genesis 6, God is already grieving. So we know grief is part of what happens in the Godhead, and learning to do it well is a way we stand in solidarity with Jesus. So the invitation to weep is really an invitation to become like God, because Genesis 1, God is saying creation is so good, 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 very good. But by Genesis 6, God is weeping. And we know Jesus wept. And to be able to enter grief and allow it to become a place of solidarity with Jesus is a wonderful invitation. I am with you, Jesus, in your suffering, and you are with me.
And what a comfort that is. We don't worship a God that is detached from our sorrows. And I mean, what I find so tragic when I listen to people is that people that are grieving, that are angry with God, and basically in doing that, pushing him away when he is exactly what they need in order to let
That's
him
right.
weep with them, to be comforted. Okay. We're on chapter number 6, an invitation to admit I may be wrong. You know, we did a whole podcast episode on this one because Joan was preparing to teach this one. And we were recording, I think, on
Yes.
Monday or Tuesday of that week, and she was teaching on Thursday, and she hadn't written her message yet for it. So we had a conversation about this one that was so rich. So I'll invite everybody to go back and listen to that one in its fullest. But for the purpose of what we're doing here, an invitation to admit I may be wrong. What that sounds like a kind of a twisted way to say that's an invitation.
Tell us about that,
What
Adele.
about that, Adele?
What were you thinking?
Well, I was thinking, if you can't admit you're wrong,
Mm-hmm.
you won't even be able to receive an invitation.
Mm.
You know, I think about, there's a quote here at the beginning of the chapter. My own experience is that for human beings, certainty does not exist, has never existed, will not, in our finite states ever exist, and moreover should not. It is not a gift God has chosen to give his creatures, doubtlessly wisely. So to admit I might be wrong is simply to admit I am a finite human being who can know things truly about God, but cannot possibly know everything about everything. So it invites us to humility and to listening.
I think in relationships, this one is so huge in terms of just figuring out how to get along with people. The invitation to admit I may be wrong. You know, I may be wrong about this, but this is how I'm seeing it right now. What do you, and to be saying, what do you think? And I mean, how much conflict would be
I
avoided
know.
if we just were
Well,
able
It's
to do
true.
that?
there's so much freedom there, right? Of just changing our mindset or changing the openness of our heart or our attitude, or, just subtle, sometimes little shifts that go along with this.
Yeah. I think there's a piece of it that we can mistake our worth for our being right.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think our school system kind of gets that into us too. You know, it's right akin to performance, that we're graded on being
That's right.
right. We're valued when we're right, and then but it just doesn't work in life very well for us, relationally speaking, and then also with God, because how are we going to listen to his invitations when we're so sure we're right? And everybody else is wrong, and maybe even God is too. Like, God, you got this one
That's
wrong,
right.
with whatever's going on in my life, right? And I mean, I was listening to somebody tell me a piece of their life story, and we were doing kind of an imaginative prayer piece, and she was in this conversation with God, and she was actually arguing with God over the fact that no, she had not been sidelined. And in the midst, she's actually arguing with God over her value and trying to convince God that she's just not worthy. And so this went on for a while, and I said, "Well, so this arguing with God about this, how's that working out for
Mhm.
you?" You know, and she stopped, and there was this long pause. She goes, "I'm just not sure I'm gonna win this one." And another long pause, and then, the conversation went on from there, like, "Okay, wait a minute. I guess I have to consider that I might be wrong about my worth and my value and my ability to contribute," which she had convinced herself she had been sidelined. And I mean, it was just such an interesting thing because we can't really make progress unless we can open our hands
That's right.
a bit to admit that we might be wrong. And basically, it's an invitation to see something from another perspective. So I love that one. I love how it's phrased. I love how subversive it is. I love so
And
much about that
honestly, in
phrase. So
my marriage, if Doug can just say, "Well, I could be wrong about that," and I can say, "Well, I could be wrong about that," it saves us so much agony. Otherwise, we fight. No, you're wrong.
because
I'm right. I remember right. You remember wrong. Oh,
yeah, yeah. Let's all take that one to heart today. Okay, chapter 7, invitation to forgive. That one's pretty obvious, I think, but how central is that one to our spiritual life? Mm.
so I think because our society creates the expectation that we should have expectations and that people should meet our expectations. And when they don't, and somebody said an expectation is a disappointment waiting to happen. Well, when people don't meet our expectations, we get resentful or angry. And then there are people who actually do us wrong, which makes us resentful and angry. So it's like, what do we do with the resentment and the anger and the bitterness and the I'm right and you're wrong? So the chapter is really on how to live free, how to, if we don't forgive, the person we hurt is mostly us. We hang on to all that's toxic and poisonous in our system. So
Okay, invitation to wait is chapter number
I think
8.
I said something about this at the beginning.
Mhm.
This is the inevitable
Yeah.
reality of all human experience, and yet it is something that we don't want to do. We don't even want to sit in a traffic jam, or we want our boxes to arrive with Amazon Prime tomorrow, and we don't even want to wait. You mean I'm going to have to wait till next week to get my
And
folding
now,
chairs? What's with that? It's like, well, yeah,
Well,
waiting.
yeah, and I mean, let's argue with an
Yeah.
eternal God over that
well,
one
and it feels so
and
passive,
see how.
right? And unproductive. And actually,
Right.
it's so active.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay, then
It's a
chapter 9 is an
to pray,
invitation to pray.
which again is obvious,
Yeah.
but I think it's really going through the Lord's Prayer and
Mhm.
taking each phrase and saying, what would it look like to pray this phrase into our lives? We even take your kingdom come. Well, your kingdom come in me. What does that mean? Your kingdom come. Your will be done by me. How do I pray into those things? So it's just really guiding you into the Lord's Prayer and a way to pray your life through His prayer.
Mm. So many of these are about an invitation to release something, and then so we can receive peace. That there's an exchange that happens in the midst of it all.
That's right.
I love that. Chapter 10 is an invitation to remember. Joan, you said something about this one that was significant.
Well, I think a piece of it was, just this whole idea of story and looking back together at your story together with God. And Sybil always says this, the word remember is remember. It's sorting it out, but then it's putting it back together with God. So it's, helping you reframe for me, how do you look at your past and what invitations are there, and seeing your story as a part of God's story. Yes, it was an important chapter in this book, and it's been a reoccurring theme in any of the spiritual formation classes we've taught.
Yes, in chapter 11, an invitation to the most excellent way. What were you talking about there, Adele?
Well, Paul calls love the most excellent way. And it's a meditation on the 1 Corinthians 13 and what it actually means to live out of this passage. And I talk about the counterfeits of love and then the tests of love. And so it's, loving is the central message of Jesus. Love the Lord your God with all your mind, all your strength, all your heart. Love your neighbor as yourself. And this kind of love is really death, has a lot of dying in it. And so what does it mean to take this most excellent way at love, even though you're going to fail at it again and again? It's a worthy journey.
Such a worthy journey. And this book is just so full of treasures. And it's a guide for living. It's a guide for living free is what it is. It's called Invitations from God, Accepting God's Offer to Rest, Weep, Forgive, Wait, Remember, and More by Adele Calhoun. It's published by IVP, and you can get it, I suppose, anywhere fine books are sold, as they always say, right?
Or on Amazon.com, and it'll be to you tomorrow.
You don't have to wait.
You don't have to wait.
Or later today sometimes.
That's right.
Yeah. Oh, we'll look forward to your new book coming out, because we're always interested. Now, I've done previous interviews with Adele. Recently, we did Spiritual Rhythms for the Enneagram, a handbook for harmony and transformation. Definitely. Oh my goodness, this one's going to take a long time to get all the value out of. It's not a book to be browsed. It's a book to be worked through.
It's a workbook.
And
It's a workbook, yes.
it's a workbook. Yeah. And the Spiritual Disciplines Handbook by Adele Calhoun is another one of our favorites. And we've done an interview with Adele on that one too. And if you're interested in spiritual practices and entering into them, that particular piece is just, it's like, it's a book of short handouts almost on all of these, how many?
83, I think.
83 or so? 83 spiritual practices that basically introduce you to all kinds of options about how to connect with God. And so, Adele, we are so grateful for you.
Well, thank you,
and
Sharon.
your contribution to we recommend all of your books so heartily, because of the fact that when we're talking about the intersection of life story and spiritual practice, spiritual development, that's where you reside. And so we have some interesting things in common with life story work and everything that you seem to have come out of you, that I guess I should say flows through you, and blesses us in your amazing and beautiful writing. So, Adele,
Thank
thank
you,
you so much
Sharon.
for
Thank
being
you,
with us
Joan.
today.
You're welcome. Good to be with you.
We're so glad to be with you. So, everyone, oh, and Adele, is there anything else that you want to invite people to join you in? Do you have any workshops coming up?
Well, our workshops should be listed on our website, which is calhounministries.com. And then
Okay, spell
Calhoun,
that for people.
CALHOUN, ministries.com. And then we have a
Okay.
web page. Well, it's not a web page. We have a Facebook page called Spiritual Rhythms for the Enneagram. And right now we are doing breath prayers for each number. So if you go to our Facebook page, 8 o'clock is when we do it, but it's there anytime. And we're helping each number understand their default and how they can pray into freedom.
Oh, that sounds so good. I will be checking that out myself. So thanks again, everybody, for listening. This has been another episode of the One Life Maps podcast. Please tune in again next week. Oh gosh, this should be like episode something, 50 something. And so we've been at it almost for a year now. And we're so grateful you have been tuning in. And there's a whole archive if you want to binge us. And if you have any suggestions for what we should do in season 2, as we wrap up season 1 here, we'd love to hear from you. Email us at service@onelifemaps.com, and we will be responding to you and thank you for the suggestions along the way.
Okay.
Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Have you thought, I don't know myself anymore? Have you wondered, is there something more? Are you at a crossroads in life and asking, which way will lead me toward expressing more of who I am made to be? Are you looking for a way to understand the restlessness you feel inside? Are you seeking a deeper spiritual life and desire to rediscover who you are through God's eyes? You're ready for the life mapping experience of Listen to My Life. Go to onelifemaps.com to purchase your portfolio of visual life maps. While you're there, check out our upcoming virtual coaching groups, live workshops, and options for you to facilitate the Listen to My Life experience with others. That's onelifemaps.com. ONELIFEMAPS.com.